How good are you at reading other people's emotions? Take a quick look at these 5 different pictures and see if you can identify the emotion that's expressed in each picture. Consider this a warm-up for taking a closer look at psychological perspectives on emotions. Our discussion will focus on 3 areas. First, defining emotional processes. Second, discussing the search for core human emotions. And third, a very brief review of the models that are used to examine emotion. Emotion is most typically defined as having positive or negative affective states, which consist of physiological arousal, expressive behaviors, and cognitive appraisal. Physiological arousal can be measured through a variety of means, including heart rate, muscle tension, perspiration. Expressive behavior reflects the way in which we communicate emotion, facial expressions, nonverbal body language. Cognitive appraisal is the process that goes on within our head. It's how we sum up what we believe is going on. It reflects a subjective process of making decisions about how we should feel in any given situation. So what are the fundamental human emotions? What are the core emotions that are consistent across individuals? In the 1970s, Paul Ekman conducted cross-cultural research to determine what are the primary or basic emotions. His work, involving New Guinea Islanders as well as U.S. college students, knowing what the core emotions are does not necessarily give us a better idea of how they develop or how individuals decide what they're feeling. For that, we need to turn to the various theories of emotion. The James Lange model represents one explanation for emotion. The key underlying concept suggests that your brain interprets specific physiological responses as particular emotions. In other words, events lead to or cause a physiological response that's then identified as emotion. For example, I'm sad because I'm crying. You'll notice the graphic representation identifying an event leading to an autonomic nervous system response, which then leads to the identification of an emotion. One illustration of this is the facial feedback hypothesis suggests a direct link between muscles in the face and emotional processing. This hypothesis suggests that forming facial expressions may actually cause emotions. While there is some support for this, there really isn't a great deal of support in the literature. One study that does support it had people put a pencil in their mouth, forming their mouth into the shape of a smile, and then rating cartoons. The group that had the pencil in their mouth, causing their mouth to form the shape of a smile, were more likely to rate the cartoons as funnier. Walter Cannon and Philip Bard were quite critical of the James Lange theory. In particular, they sharply criticized the timing that would have had to have been involved in the James Lange theory. They suggested that in many cases, the emotional response was far too quick to allow sequencing, where there was first an ANS response, and then that led to a particular emotion. Instead, they suggested that both emotion and ANS arousal could simultaneously follow a particular event. While the brain mechanisms that they suggested as responsible for these emotional processes were actually incorrect, their work actually spurred quite a bit of investigation into the relationship between emotion and brain function. Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer are responsible for a two-factor theory intended to explain emotion. The key concept underlying their theory suggests that individuals use personal and social cues to label arousal as a specific emotion. In other words, in any given situation, people find themselves aroused by some sort of triggering event. They scan the environment to get social cues, and they assess their knowledge of the individuals involved. That information then allows them to label that arousal as a particular emotion. With this theory in mind, it's possible for the same individuals sharing a particular activating event to label emotions differently. The specific ways in which we label events are based in large part on how individuals appraise or assess particular situations and what labels that leads them to. In an effort to assess the strength of their theory, Schachter and Singer embarked on a research project. In this research project, participants were randomly assigned to two different groups. You'll notice in this slide that the groups are represented on either the top or the bottom line. The group in the top line received an injection and was led to believe that it was a vitamin. In fact, they had received a stimulant. Following the injection, they were asked to interact with what turned out to be a very difficult study accomplice. This person asked them very confrontive and insulting questions. Questions such as, how many men has your mother had affairs with? Where the answer started with less than 4 and went through more than 10. Following this interaction, ratings were collected with regard to their level of anger. The second group received an injection and was correctly told that it was a stimulant. They interacted with the same difficult study accomplice and were asked the same confrontive and insulting questions, and they also received and completed an assessment of their anger. The findings supported the Schachter and Singer two-factor theory. The group at top was actually found to be more angry based on their ratings than the lower group. This is consistent with the two-factor theory because the lower group, the group that received the injection, was told that it was a stimulant, was less angry because they had a more accurate way of labeling their arousal. They were told that they received a stimulant, and they did in fact receive a stimulant, so when they felt angry or insulted, they believed it was because of the stimulant. The first group, in contrast, was more angry because the stimulant, which they were told was a vitamin, did not help them explain their heightened arousal. And since they couldn't use the injection as a reason to label their feelings, they labeled them based on their interaction and the confrontive questions, and as a result, labeled themselves as more highly angry. Research findings regarding Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory have been mixed. While there have been studies that support this theory, there have also been a number of studies that have failed to support the theory. One of the greatest criticisms to date about the two-factor theory is the fact that even in instances with very small amounts of arousal, individuals are able to identify and label their emotions.